Sorry, forgot to turn on the recording. And then lastly, families and adults can register to make native seed bombs at our Ecology Center on March 6th during our Sunday open house hours. You can also tour the Ecology Center where we have lots of bird and mammal mounts, including a beaver mount. So everyone can come and see how big the beavers are and what they look like. We also have a beaver skull. And we have other educational displays and nature-based activities to go for children. So a little bit of housekeeping. We're in a webinar format tonight because there was so much interest in the program. You can see we've got 110 people on already. More were signed up. So if you have questions along the way, put them in the chat. Actually, put them in the Q&A. I'll be monitoring the Q&A, but not the chat. And we may take some of them if they are relevant as they come. So put them in there at any time. So finally, to the main event. Oh, I just want to mention one thing, a little promo for the book that brought me to Skip Lisle, our speaker. The book is called Eager. Oh, it's got a really long title. It's called Eager, and then it's got a long subtitle, and it's by Bob Goldfarb, I think. Is that his name? Do you remember his name, Skip?
Ben
Goldfarb. It's a great book, and there's a whole chapter on Skip, and that was how I found him. So I strongly recommend it. I'll put a link to where you can check it out or find it online. I found it at my local bookstore, but and hopefully you will too. So to introduce Skip, our speaker, Skip Lisle, is driven by a love of wildlife. His favorite professional and leisure activity can be summed up as improving wildlife habitat. He was first attracted to beaver ponds at age 12 by the large trout he caught in them, and he spent countless hours in his youth observing them transform his parents' property. After getting a master's in wildlife management from the University of Maine, his first job was with the Penobscot Indian Nation developing flow devices on their 150,000 acres to address a longstanding problem of culverts clogged by beavers. Since then, he has spent years perfecting flow control devices that are effective, long-lasting, and capable of being adapted to different sites. He now operates Beaver Deceivers International out of Grafton, Vermont, and is currently in Florida on a job, wondering if he needs to worry about snakes and alligators. So take it away, Skip, and I'll put some stuff, some links in the chat, but please put your questions in the Q&A as we go. Take it away, Skip.
Okay, Caroline, thank you for that wonderful introduction. And thank you all for joining. My goodness, what a big crowd. It's really fantastic. I appreciate it. So I assume you can all read my title slide. I just wanted to start talking about terminology a little bit. We're mostly talking about what I call rich, open freshwater wetlands tonight, but the term wetland is very broad. So when you use it, you have to specify what kind of wetlands you're using. And so another term I frequently use, probably just as much as swamp, at least on my own property. And then of course, there's always marsh as well. But these types of rich open wetlands, even in the best of times, let's say before European settlement, were very rare and incredibly valuable, incredibly important ecologically and hydrologically. They're just so rich, so much richer than most upland habitats. And again, rare, even then, very, very rare. And they got a lot rare. They've become a lot rarer since that time. You know, when Europeans arrived and the human population began to grow rapidly in North America. Let's see. Okay, that'll bring us over. Here's a picture that kind of points that out. You don't get many wetlands on mountainsides. And of course, we in the Northeast here, we have a lot of mountains. This happens to be in southern Vermont, looking to the west over the Green Mountain National Forest towards Mount Equinox in the distance there. And so we do have a magnificent forest in much of this continent, but the eastern forest in our area is really wonderful. And this picture really highlights how nice it is and how lucky we are, at least in my mind, to live in an area which is mixed forest. So you have this wonderful combination of green and brown, if you will, the evergreens and not so evergreens or hardwoods. And again, there's a lot of different terms for those groupings. So that's an rich open marsh, I would say, in the lower part of the picture, but very extremely rare, and which contributes to their extreme importance ecologically. And we've been at war with wetlands. They've been our enemy for a long time, and so we've lost most of them. Who knows? Maybe we've lost 80% of our wetlands in North America. But something very dramatic and along those lines. This is Fort Dix down in New Jersey, where I've done some work. But I imagine there's some lead poisoning in that particular wetland. So this is a target range. Oh, wait a minute. I missed what I wanted to say here. I got ahead of myself. I also wanted to note that for humans to reconstruct wetlands, which we're doing a lot of. I mean, if any of you work in the federal government, you'd be more knowledgeable about that than me, but there's a lot of that going on at great expense. And to create a man-made wetland is not a natural wetland, let's say, and not that good compared to many of the natural alternatives. So I was just thinking, how wonderful it would be, and largely based on the cost of trying to build wetlands, how wonderful it would be if only we had an animal that, that did that, did work for free. And, what's that, Caroline? We do? There is such a thing? What? And we don't, the society generally just kills them and doesn't appreciate that fact. Are you kidding me? My God, we have to change that. It's a miracle that we have a species that looks a little bit like this, that does this. It's an absolute miracle. And it's a miracle as well that we didn't lose them. I mean, we almost did. I mean, imagine how voracious we happen to be. There's 2 beaver species in the world, one in Eurasia and one in North America. So hey, we're lucky. Most continents don't have an animal that builds wetlands, so we're lucky to have it. But they were almost all wiped out throughout Eurasia before they were almost all wiped out across North America. Amazing. But they started to make a recovery around 1900, and they've been in a recovery phase ever since, and they still are. But I also want to, it's just important to put these things in context, in sort of a spatial and temporal context, before we start to talk about the challenges we face living with beavers in the modern day. And this is what I mean primarily. Beavers are damming habitat is defined as low gradient areas on small streams. That's it. That picture I showed you of the Green Mountain National Forest, that was a very big beaver pond or beaver flowage. a term that I first learned when I moved to Maine back in the 1990. Anyway, they're unique, very unique types of wetlands or marshes or whatever. And so they definitely should have their own name. And so I'm sticking with flowage. But as you saw from that photograph, which was just taken a few years ago, you don't see any flowages on any of those hillsides. So what that boils down to is that beavers only can occupy or beaver damming habitat. Okay, I'm not counting the large rivers and the large lakes that beavers do occupy without damming. But beaver damming habitat is may only be 1.5% of the landscape, maybe 2. I mean, it's going to vary a lot depending on well, how much of the land has been taken over by humans and topography as well. Clearly, you get more of that or more potential for that in flat terrain as opposed to mountainous terrain. So that's important to note, because that really, once we start talking about beaver-human conflicts, that really limits it. And that knowledge, has always made me understand that we can eliminate this problem, because there's a very finite number of chronic conflict points. There may only be 6, in any given town. So you can eliminate those. We now have the technology and the ability. And so if you can do that in a town in maybe a couple weeks worth of work, and if you build good flow devices, another general term, then that you may be done with it for 50 years. Excuse me. So I talk about, why not? We can beaver-proof the state of Maine. We got to get busy, and we got to start checking off those conflict points. But if in that given town you have 6 chronic conflict points, and you try to solve that problem by killing beavers, then that's just a guarantee that you'll never solve the problem at any one of those points. And those 6 conflict points, over the years and decades and centuries will translate into hundreds of conflict points in every town. So we have to start checking them off. So here's an example of what that animal that Caroline told me about can actually do. Pretty spectacular. Now here's a picture from Vermont, and so the theme of my work and my talk is largely the tremendous opportunity that is presented to us because beavers are around, and we've destroyed so much of their habitat. I mean, there's places like this. This is rural Vermont, and this is ancient beaver habitat. That brings me to another point. So beavers, where they dam is totally determined by physics. They're basically low energy sites where the dams will survive high flow events, usually, and where the damming effort translates into enough of a habitat to make that effort worthwhile. So again, low grading areas and small streams. So these areas, these ancient habitats, have been taken over, to a huge extent by humans, like in most rural areas. You see this everywhere. And so if we can ever get those back, there's enormous potential to create, just a vast amount of fantastic wildlife habitat. And we have to be creative. The first thing you have to do is you have to protect the ecosystems. You can't have clogged culverts, simple as that. And if you have a kill strategy, you can't just, to effectively protect a culvert, you can't just kill some of the beavers. You have to kill all of them in perpetuity. Every time new ones come, you have to kill them. So you're extirpating beavers from the general vicinity of every conflict point. So that's a starting point. But also, they're really, the government has a great potential role if they can somehow, help to subsidize people who support beavers on their property, for example. If the beavers, if they got a little money, they might start killing the beavers, stop mowing the field and stop killing the beavers, and made a wonderful wetland here and thousands of other sites. After all, our government is spending vast amounts of money making man-made wetlands, almost always in ancient beaver habitat. So then the beavers finally come back and you have a conflict because you have a man-made wetland. I'm about to go to Las Vegas, Nevada, to protect a man-made wetland in ancient beaver habitat from beavers. So I'm not happy about that at all. I'm going to do everything in my power to convince them just to let the beavers, just dominate that system and bury it with a nice natural wetland. So anyway, so there is,
Can I just jump in for 1 second? And can you just clarify for people, when you say conflict points, what you're talking about?
No, good for you. That's important. It's almost always a road culvert, and it's almost always because of damming behavior, the conflicts. And so, 90%, maybe 95% of the time, it's where a road transects ancient beaver habitat or beaver damming habitat, however you want to define it, a low grade area, on a small stream. Then you have a conflict point. And the reason for that, and I describe culverts, and well, before I get into that, you also have quote unquote regular beaver dams that, that'll flood properties and cause problems sometimes that aren't associated with a culvert or a narrow bridge or some constriction that humans have made.
And one more question, Skip. Someone's asking, how, from this picture, how can you tell that field is ancient beaver habitat?
Okay, let me finish my thought in that first one. Where was I on that? Forget now. Where was I going with that first question, Caroline?
Oh, you mean conflict points?
Conflict point. Yeah, I was describing conflict points. Yeah, so that's the vast majority of it, and that's by far and away the biggest challenge. Then you have tree chewing that people object to, and digging behavior that can cause damage. But they're much more minor, and probably a lot more easier to solve. Anybody can protect trees from being chewed in a long-term, non-lethal manner, whereas a flow device is very complicated, specialized undertaking. Yeah, so just at a glance, I've been in and studying beaver habitats my entire life, and I've never. They're just so fascinating. They're so dynamic, and beavers are just so interesting. Let's face it, and so it's really easy for me at a glance to know that. But it's a small stream. That's that thing in the middle, and it's flat. It's relatively flat. So automatically that was dammed. Beavers always dam those sites. And so in a lot of our agricultural fields, even in mountainous rural areas like Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine, I drive around and see this type of situation all the time. And one reason it's a good field to grow grass, even though most of the time it's not being used. We're just kind of obsessive about mowing things like wildflowers, which is one reason we have insect problems. We just can't stop mowing. So beavers, in the North Country, I date the beginning of this landscape with the retreat of the glaciers and the arrival of beavers. And so for roughly 10,000 years, beavers have been damming these exact same sites. And beaver dams and beaver flowages are the greatest sediment sinks on the planet. And so just over thousands of years, the fine sediments have been being captured behind those. This would have been a series of beaver dams capturing fine sediments. So then we have a relatively flat, relatively rich fields because of that history with beavers. So I hope I appreciate, because there's so much to cover here, and I miss a lot. So I do appreciate those questions as I go along.
Skip, are you going to talk at all about, there are a couple of questions about sort of beaver habits. Do you want to cover those now, or do you want?
Yeah, that's fine. There's no guarantee I'd hit that later. So, yeah,
So
yeah.
someone really wants to know what beavers eat.
Okay. Yeah, we can do that. They eat a lot, hundreds and hundreds of different vegetative species and the occasional snail and so yeah, not just trees, not just trees. And so if it's a rich wetland with a lot of aquatic plants, say water lilies, which I'm seeing a lot of in this wetland I'm working on in Florida, then that's a fantastic food source. Beavers won't chew trees all summer long, all during the growing season. They'd prefer those nice soft stem plants that are in and near the wetland. It's also much safer to eat there than to wander up into the uplands and try to get a tree. So the trees are mostly important as a way of storing nutrients. And so they're most important in the winters, and beavers make a food cache, of course, near their lodge of branches in the fall. And that helps them get through.
Skip, can I ask a related question, which is, I had beavers in my backfield, and we refer to one area of the upland forest as the killing field because there are about 20 poplars that they took down. Was that all for the leaves, for the foliage in the spring?
Yeah. Poplar, or I call it aspen. It's their favorite tree species. They love it. And yeah, but a lot of people think beavers are, and that goes to my flow device talk. They think beavers are really smart, but I beg to differ. They're not very smart in the human sense of the word. They don't do a lot of deductive reasoning. I think people assume that most animals have brains that function like ours do, and ours are just so unique. So they're mostly responding to environmental stimuli and not really planning too well. I'm sorry to say, but that allows me to beat them with flow devices. Otherwise, I want to have it prayer. But one thing that really, really disappoints me with beavers, like if I clear land, right, and I look at, I want to cut some big trees down. I look around, I say, well, if I'm going to get that to the ground, I got to cut these smaller trees first, so that, let's say that big aspen tree actually reaches the ground where I can get at it. And the beavers don't do that. They just go for all the aspens first on my own property and in many other situations. 90% of the wonderful nutrients are just hung up in the trees, don't come down and don't dry or dry out and are lost. But I'm glad you mentioned aspen, because yeah, they're very important, very, very important.
Can you just clarify, in the winter, just to finish the beaver eating, don't they like literally drive branches and pieces of small trees into the mud, and
yeah.
Are they eating the bark?
Yeah, it's the bark. Yeah, it's the inner layer of bark where the nutrition is, but also, of course, in leaves and buds and fruit. Yeah, and then they just, the way, I think that's part of it. Then they'll just keep adding stuff, and sort of the weight of the cache will sink it as they add more to the top, and as it gradually gets waterlogged. And so most of it ends up below the ice. Another thing I want to mention as I'm thinking of it, and we're talking about food, is that a lot of people think that every beaver wetland is in a so-called beaver cycle. And it's often used as a justification for our need to kill them. So, so the theory being we need to kill them before they get hungry. That seems crazy, because why we just choose one or two, a few species to approach that way. It's thousands of species that are out there just struggling and living and dying without our interference. But it's also, and I think something about the human mind, we like to, the world is so complex, frighteningly complex, that we do cling to simplistic theories. And so I always tell people, well, every single wetland is different in its ability to support beavers. So many are permanent habitats. If their beavers will defend, they're territorial animals, which is critical to know, and they'll defend large territories. And if that's a rich habitat, then it's a permanent habitat. There's not going to be any cycling. Conversely, if it's a very small site, they will bounce around. Or in other types of terrain, the beaver territory will be disjointed. There'll be little poor wetlands over a broad area that the beavers just bounce around in. And so, but the territorial aspect of beavers, they're just not, you're never going to have very many beavers in any one spot because they don't tolerate other beavers. And that also that also brings me back to when I was talking about culverts as beaver magnets, right? So beavers, the damming site is very important variable of beaver habitat. And so a high quality damming site, that alone really makes it's so important. It makes the whole habitat a high quality habitat because it's so simple. It's just so little energy is required to, say, dam a culvert or a narrow spot in the bedrock. And so beavers will always they'll always be attracted to culverts to dam. There's never been a better damming site ever. And as territorial animals, they're often also looking for unoccupied habitats. And so when we adopt a kill policy, we've also created an unoccupied habitat. So we've doubled the magnetic effect of that culvert. Another thing, just quickly, because we have a lot of flow device pictures to look at. I kind of like talking about this general stuff. And I think it's really important, again, for context. But another thing that has happened, and two things I should hit on while we're on this subject. There are tons of animals that eat beavers. Okay, it'd be nice to have wolves and mountain lions. Coyotes are filling the wolf niche. They're catching beavers all the time. Bears are getting a lot. Eagles get them. Beavers come in all sizes. So a lot of smaller predators get small beavers. Tons of beavers are killed by motor vehicles. So there's that. And also the fur trade, my next slide maybe is fur trade in great big letters, because it just dominates everything that's going on, even still today, in terms of the landscape changes. But I assume historically these beaver habitats were incredibly vegetatively rich. And then what happened when the beavers were eliminated? Beaver dams don't persist in their absence. They just decay and completely disappear. And all these wetlands, millions of beaver flowages just simply winked out in North America's northern forest. They disappeared because the forest was only too happy to colonize that rich soil once it dried up. And so they all became forested. So even today, you'll see tons of standing dead timber in flowages. That is an indication of the arrival of Europeans 400 years ago. So it's really fascinating in that respect, and they're beautiful things. And we're lucky to live in a time period where we still have that standing dead timber and beaver flowages, because it's going to fall over, and the next generation or two generations won't have that as these habitats revert back to their natural open, non-forested, marshy state without any standing dead timber. But what happened is that timber and the loss of water and the timber took all the sun away from these plants, and so tons of these wetlands became very sterile. They lost almost all their wetland plants, just were gone for hundreds of years. And so now that beavers are reoccupying these habitats, it's going to be maybe hundreds of years before they redevelop a rich array of aquatic plants and that'll better support beavers. So I think I've covered most of that. For a little diversion there, folks, but good stuff. So let's move on. I've already talked about the fur trade, so don't really need this slide, but Yeah, it went on for a long time. And beavers were quickly, sort of started on the East Coast and moved west, and they were quickly eliminated along the Maine coast. Around 1600 or 1650 maybe. And so they've been gone for several hundred years in most places, just completely gone. And they're, as I said, they're in the past century, they're recovering and they're still reoccupying those ancient haunts. And this is what it often looks like when culverts are clogged. It gets very expensive. They have to be ramrodded or whatever, and it will happen over and over and over again, as most of you are probably aware. But it's a real annoying problem if you don't protect those culverts. Where was that site? Oh, that was in northern Maine. Yeah, that one. And this is in southern Vermont, and you can see the culvert in the middle. The railroad company, they are very reluctant to use flow devices. They just try to kill, beavers at every single site. And I've been working on them for 20 years to try to protect this culvert. And this is private property, upstream from that culvert. It's flowing to the right. And so these people in those houses get very angry when their field is constantly flooded because the beavers are clogging and reclogging that culvert in between killing events. Every time they do, this is a place where they park cars. The railroad has to move all these cars, bring an excavator off of a flatbed car, bring it down and clean that culvert with an excavator. And they're perfectly willing to do that endlessly at the cost of tens of thousands of dollars and a lot of angry people. And it's hard. So we have our work cut out for us, people, but it's a tremendous opportunity, as I will keep repeating, to solve the problem, keep more beavers in more places, create fantastic wildlife habitats that support just a vast array of game and non-game species, and save society or individual towns just a tremendous amount of money. So we're going to move on to flow devices now, and which really started for me professionally in 1995 when I started work at the Penobscot Nation. And the wonderful artist that made this sign got beavers into it. There, as you see in the upper left-hand corner, it's a beaver silhouette. So I was glad to see that, as you might suspect. And I here's some aerial photographs. This is an extremely rural area in Alton, Maine, just north of Bangor. But very flat, wonderfully flat country. So the beaver flowages could be huge, absolutely huge. And you can see those lines, the water is flowing to the top through the road culvert there. And the wetland on the bottom is about 50 acres. So, and the beavers were, this is all one territory. The beavers were moving from that big wetland down and blocking the culvert. And so to effectively protect that culvert, okay, lethally, you're going to drain all those wetlands, so 60, 70 acres maybe of wetlands you're going to drain if you take your job seriously about, protecting that culvert lethally, which requires you to kill all the beavers, and then all the dams will drain. So great opportunities like that all over the place. Now this is oh man, I can't believe it. I was so enthusiastic and energetic and ignorant when I began making flow devices. And this is one of my wonderful early models. And oh boy, and I had been a carpenter too for a long time. So I had that going for me. But I guess the thing that, so I never quit. I just redid this site over and over and over again. I was never going to quit because at least I knew, I knew partly from my education at UMaine, but I'd always known it since I was a child catching big brook trout, that, the only option was to kill the beavers, and what that would mean ecologically was not acceptable. It was not acceptable to fail, and I had to make it work. But I thought I'd master this issue in a year, and now it's 25 years later, and it's still a big challenge. every site's different. And even though beavers don't do much deductive reasoning, it's a big challenge. This is so what the first concept I came up with was the idea of a trapezoidal fence. And so this is the first time I sort of stuck a wing out there to the right to make it trapezoidal. And the only thing, I didn't know anything about what I generically call pipe systems at the time, and so I was restricted to building fences. And the only way you're going to have any chance with a simple fence like this on a culvert is to make it very big, and then to try to make the shape as effective as possible. So the idea of the wing was the beavers have to dam along it, and that is beaver dams are perpendicular to stream flow. That just creates the most unnatural angle possible for a beaver dam. And did little triangles like this. This is my friend Nick Sapiel, but didn't have any chance. You can see the fencing is way too fine. The holes are way too small. The perimeter of the fence is is very short. But we like the idea of covering them because people could stand on them and call moose, which they did, or have picnics. And so, we tried all sorts of things. But this is also all these last three pictures are from Alton, and this is a big trapezoid, and that does have a chance, at least in a small watershed. But an awful lot of work goes into building a big fence. Awful lot of work. Here's another one up in the Madamusconis area of Maine. And then this just kept evolving, because the beavers just will dam around most fences. The trouble with it is your flow device is attached to the dam. There's no separation distance. It's attached to the dam, which is the road. And so we started out here with a little rectangle, and then we added the wings on both sides, and that wasn't enough. And so we added the front. But a few people had picnics on here and called moose in and enjoyed it. But it was definitely an early evolutionary stage of the beaver deceiver, which is a term I first coined in 1995. So I'm the only person in the world who builds honest to goodness modern beaver deceivers, and yet it's a very, very popular term. So everybody uses it for instead of say using the term flow device, which I always use for just that covers everything, all types of flow devices. And so it's important to try to as we build this profession to try to use the language correctly and accurately. This is a Mass Audubon site in Massachusetts. There's my daughter at a little trapezoidal fence in Stockton Springs, Maine. She is now 29 in graduate school. I've been at this a long time. So this is not mine, but this is what happens. This is what happens when you're enthusiastic and you publish papers and you try to help people by sharing information. So I drive around the landscape and see awful, hopeless little trapezoidal fences everywhere, and I just want to say, no, I haven't been doing trapezoids for 20 years, and I never would have encouraged you to build them this small, and it's nothing magical, nothing at all magical about a trapezoid. Here's another one that somebody else tried, and this is a very big threat, very big threat to the agenda, is that people generally have no appreciation of that there's a lot involved in making a successful flow device, and everybody tries and they all fail. It's a guarantee they fail. And what I do, then people who don't really know better will often look at my modern stuff and say, oh, that's overbuilt. No, it's not. It's the bare minimum that has a chance of working in the long-term presence of beavers without ever killing them. And not only do you have to fool beavers, but it have to be built to a high standard just to survive the elements. I mean, it's an extremely harsh environment. It has to survive, not in Florida, but in where you are, has to survive ice. And then, of course, acidic water, which will dissolve the steel very quickly if you don't protect it, and floods. So one day I built this filter. That's what I call. I'm trying to filter beavers out and filter water in, or sneak water away from beavers. So this was in 1997. I called this the round fence. And you put this on the end of a pipe and you have a pipe system. It's not a bad filter. I've moved on from this a long time ago to something much better that you'll see, but this is this really dominates much of the industry now, and people call it the pond leveler. We named it combined with a pipe. We named it the Caster Master in juxtaposition to Beaver Deceiver, but unfortunately, and it's been published in a lot, but it's never taken hold. But the Penobscots deserve a great deal of credit for, they gave me the opportunity to come up with these ideas, which are now benefiting even the trapezoidal fence. A lot of people are using, sometimes big enough to do it semi-effectively. But anyway, the round fence is everywhere out there, and so they made it all possible by letting me pursue this, even though I was struggling mightily for a long time. And so this is this wonderful, simple pipe system called the Caster Master. And so once we had an effective pipe system, then that totally changed what we could do at culverts. The trapezoidal fence became irrelevant. Big fences became irrelevant, because if you have a good pipe system and you combine it with a fence, the fence can be small and square and simple and cheap to build. So there's nothing unique. We did not invent the pipe. We're not the first people who stuck a pipe in a beaver dam. Nothing unique about that. And we're borrowing that from another industry. It's a wonderful invention, but it was invented by another industry. So the only unique thing about this is the filter, the round fence filter.
Skip, can I jump in with a question? And there are a couple of questions that I'll leave till the end, but can you explain what you're trying to do with the flow device?
Yes, I certainly can. I always get ahead of myself, just assuming everybody has been thinking about nothing but flow devices for 20 years like I have. Well, like I may have said, I'm trying to sneak water away from the beavers. That's the key. So you need a big filter. See, beavers they're looking for stimuli associated with dam leaks. The sound of running water, the look of running water, the feel of running water. So the filter's key. I'm trying to, even with the old trapezoids, I'm trying to filter water over a broad area, because those water molecules are going to be moving a lot slower, as they enter that barrier, the fence, that perimeter that keeps the beavers away. And then as they enter the culvert or the pipe, they're going to pick up speed, and there's going to be a whole lot of damming stimuli going on inside your fence or filter, keeping beavers away from that. Thereby, they don't understand the concept of a hollow pipe. No idea what that is. So you can sneak water away from them if you make a big enough, most sophisticated enough filter. You're just sneaking the water into the filter and through the pipe, sneaking it through the pipe and through the dam or into your fence that you have protecting a culvert. See, modern beaver deceivers are always be a two-part system. And initially, you have to have that initial fence in the culvert so beavers can't directly clog the culvert. But then you have all the deceiving, that's not deceiving them, but all the deceiving takes place in this the associated pipe system.
So the reason the long pipe that you just showed us is important is to basically move the point where you're draining or you're trying to maintain the level of the beaver pond at a certain level, is to move that away from the mouth of the culvert. Yeah,
that's part of it. That's a good point. Beavers are also looking for dam leaks in dams. So the further you move that leak, and there I mentioned the word separation. It's called dam leak separation. That's what the pipe will give you. The further you move that leak away from the place where they expect it, the better chance you have. That's not enough. You still have to have a big, well-designed filter. But in combination to all that, you can move enough of the water, enough of the time to hold the water down and thereby control damming behavior. Because beavers dam at the water line. that, humans will build a big dam and then wait for the reservoir to fill up. Beavers are working essentially at the water line. So if they can't, because of your pipe system, they can't bring it up, then that's going to arrest the damming behavior to a large extent. That's excuse me. So that's a lot, but there are many other things. There's many other, every site's different. Some sites have deep water, some sites have no water. But and so my experience is crucial. I mean, the high quality flow devices I can bring to a site, is only, maybe only be 40% of success. The rest is just a broad experience. So I know how to, because every site's different, particularly a culvert site. The topography is different. The culvert size is different. The watershed's different. They're all different. You have to mold the ideal system to fit that site if you're going to be successful. And that just requires a great deal of experience. I hope that's helpful, but yeah, if I'm not hitting it enough, just keep asking, folks. We're just sneaking water away from those devils. And this is a PVC pipe, small PVC pipe in this case. It goes through a beaver dam. The rock is just because the pipe's a little buoyant. It has a downward elbow on it. That's not necessary. I just did that, but yeah, PVC is great. And the black pipes is polyethylene, and they're very different types of plastic, and either one is good. I'm using a PVC system on where I'm working here in Florida. I'll be putting that in tomorrow. So it kind of depends on what's available and, how big a pipe you need, because once you get over about a 10-inch diameter and you're working alone, PVC is too heavy to deal with. And so that I can work alone and use, 18-inch or even 24-inch diameter polyethylene pipes. And so here's just know, this is sort of an evolutionary process I'm showing you here in the design. And you see that the steel mesh is brown, right? That's because it's rust, and the acidic water will so I use heavy gauge steel. This is probably 4 gauge, 1/4-inch diameter wire, but the acidic water will eat through that very quickly. And so I'm not happy with that, because I don't want these things to last 8 years. I want them to last 80 years, ideally. And you'll see how that's been addressed. But here's another situation. This is a big round fence. This is 8 feet in diameter, but that's really small. By today's standards, for me, that's a very small filter. And that's about as big as you can build a round fence. And so you're very limited with a circular shape, and you can't put them into narrow areas, tight areas. And again, you're very limited in other ways as well, as you'll see as I move on. So here's a PVC pipe with a round fence that has epoxy coated wire. And so that is what you need to do if you don't want that steel to dissolve. And then you also have to spray every spot weld, and because they don't get them well at the factory. And then you have these transition sites where I'm still using the trapezoidal fence here, and yet I'm using pipe systems. This is in Virginia, and still using round fences. So the modern beaver, I never use a trapezoid anymore. It just took me a while to realize that, once you have good pipe systems, the shape doesn't matter, and it's much easier to build a square or rectangular fence. You can see inside that culvert how rusted out it is. That's the acidic water. Almost every culvert you see, and why I discourage people from ever using galvanized culverts. The galvanized process or coating does nothing to resist acid. And you'll see in every one of those, the bottom of those where the water's been sitting will be rotted out. Here's another transition flow device on land of the Holton Band of Maliseet Indians in northern Maine. And another thing you'll see is I'm driving posts here. They're 4 inches by 4 inches, and my first posts were cedar logs. So they're in both cases they're very hard to drive and way bigger than you need. So now I'm driving 2x4 posts, or even smaller ones than that, because that's all you need, and it's much easier to get them into the substrate. This is on Penobscot land, an 8-foot diameter round fence that does not need a top and is epoxy coated. And here you have a rectangular a rectangular, I call it a receiver fence because it's almost always receiving a pipe system that's protecting the culvert from being directly clogged.
And Skip, a couple of questions. How far out the downstream side of the dam does the pipe go?
No, all it does is go in just a little ways inside the receiver fence. You don't want to stick a pipe into a culvert. You don't need to. All you need to do is get it inside that receiver fence. You're just trying to get it beyond where the beavers can reach, and that's the idea of that fence. It prevents beavers from getting in there. If you stick
what stops the beavers from damming below the pipe outlet?
Yeah, they don't. It's not a serious problem. Almost all the damming efforts and the issues are on the upstream end of culverts. Certain situations I'll do a little something on the downstream side, but it doesn't have to be sophisticated like this. It can often just be a little horizontal, piece of fence that, over the outlet of the culvert, just to disperse the water a little bit before the beavers can start to dam it.
And one more question that's sort of relevant. Catherine says, so you're changing the conflict point so that it is no longer interesting or attractive to beavers.
Yeah, I'm eliminating the conflict point. With a good flow device, it's done.
So you've done it in a way that does not trigger their damming response.
Yeah. I know. I mean, the damming response is going to be triggered because, like, say in this site, they're going to see the opening. They see the dam, the road, they see the opening. But if they work at all, they'll work around that receiver fence and they won't be able to make any progress. And so this pipe will be holding the water down. And so that they can't, the dam's not going to grow vertically. They won't be able to make progress. If it's shallow water, they're going to feel insecure. They're going to feel vulnerable to predators. And so it's just pretty much over. Now, a lot of these situations, I'm draining wetlands, right? That's supposed to be a bad thing. Well, you can't have clogged road culverts. Sorry, can't do it. So you have to, this wetland was created, basically most of it, because the road culvert was clogged for decades. But what you're doing is you're keeping live beavers in the ecosystem and in the general vicinity. And that is hugely valuable. And frequently, magnificent wetlands are created nearby that aren't threatening any properties. It's almost always the culvert is the big issue. And especially in more rural areas, the nearby wetlands, are not going to be a threat. They're just going to be producing enormous values for society. As long as there's live beavers there to build dams and to maintain them.
All right, keep going, but we do have more questions. So, and it's getting towards 8 o'clock. So maybe
I have a lot of pictures, but we don't have to go through them all. And I can start to go through them very quickly because, they're going to be mostly shots of flow devices. But if people want to, I'll stay as late as people want to. So this is a whirlpool at the end of a pipe, right? That makes a loud sucking sound. So if that happens even inside your filter, the beavers are going to bury your filter. So I've invented something I call a whirlpool break, which is crucial. Another component that I've developed is something I call the misery multiplier. It's just a concept that beavers come in all sizes, and small beavers can go right through the 6-inch mesh and pull a lot of debris inside. So I add second or even third walls of fencing inside a filter or fence, just to complicate and basically destroy the damming environment inside. And you'll see that in these upcoming pictures. Here's like the first attempt I made at a whirlpool break. This is my son. He's also much older and larger now. There's a very crude, this actually has both a misery multiplier. There's a second arc of fencing inside that filter, that round fence, and a little roof that will dissipate the energy of the whirlpool when it's created. But very tiny, as you'll see shortly. Here's one of my first, and I call this, because I called the first things Round fences, I'm calling these square fences. I like the term filter better. It's more descriptive, but anyway. So this is one of my very first ones. You see, I don't have a good frame, like around the perimeter of that fence. That was just right in the beginning. I was just trying to figure it out. I have a very crude whirlpool break there. And, I had a lot of problems with the beavers here, but I never give up. And as long as the clients are willing to end this problem, give me a little leeway to actually end this problem while I'm learning along the way, then I can always defeat them. I don't have to kill beavers that have learned about pipe systems. You don't have to do that. You just have to make your system better. And ideally, you start off with a good big system to begin with. But again, this is when I was just starting to learn about square fences. And you can see the misery multiplier here. Very simple, small fence. And here's another situation where I'm transitioning. The one on the left is this is down in Massachusetts. The one on the left is, I hadn't really perfected the frame yet. I was trying to do it without a frame. I think I had a frame actually I did have a simple frame underwater on that fence. And you see but I do have all kinds of misery multipliers. And then I came back in a year or two and built the one on the right. And I really put a lot of misery multipliers into that as well. So
someone wants to know how you determine the height and location of the water diverting piping relative to what level the landowner wants.
Every site's different. And what I try to do is maximize wetlands and wetland values at every site. That's me. And so I often have to talk landowners into that. But most people are not educated about the tremendous value of wetlands, which is a huge challenge we all face if we want to take advantage of this opportunity. So yeah, and then there's two distinctly different types of sites. There's regular beaver dams and then culverts or other narrow man-made outlets. And so at a beaver dam, and again, every site's different. So sometimes you have a high value property that's way too low and, so you have to manage everything smaller. But if you don't, then, I frequently say, people just assume you have to control the beaver dam. So I frequently go to a site and I say, just enjoy it. There's no threat to any property. Just enjoy it. You don't have to hire me. So it's an unfortunate situation when you're talking yourself out of business all the time, but that's the way it goes. But this is a great lesson. And I can't tell you how many sites I have like this. This is in New Hampshire, but you see that big beaver wetland or flowage upstream. That's commonplace. It's commonplace. If you effective lethal strategy, that's going to drain. You're going to drain that. It's gone. So boy, it's a lot of opportunities like that. And this is just we're so lucky to live in North America and have so much good wood available from the forest products industry. And this is southern yellow pine, pressure treated. It lasts for a long time and just not free, just beautiful stuff. So I can make a frame incredibly strong and, better and stronger than you can with steel and without 1/4 the hassles. Okay, that's just another whirlpool. You see the little whirlpool inside that? You can't have that. No, that's not going to work. So here's a picture of an underwater situation. In the early days, very small whirlpool break. Again, this is another filter. And you have to have some sort of a ratio between filter size and pipe size, right? You don't want to move a huge amount of water through a small filter. The beavers will sense those fast moving molecules. So this is an 18-inch diameter pipe that goes in there. So it's a bigger filter, but very, very small and inadequate whirlpool break. And that's a different site. It looks similar, but and you can see the receiver fence. They're all different. I have to work with the topography.
So Skip, can we jump to some of the questions? Actually some people asked if you had any pictures of beavers.
I think I had that one. Yeah, sorry about that.
That's okay. I will say that there are, I put a link to Skip's website in the chat, and he's got some wonderful, if you watch the interview with Skip, there's some beautiful footage of the flowage on his property. I believe some of it is on your or maybe
All of it. Yeah. Yeah. That's
and
what I
and
moved back.
some lovely footage of beavers, video footage of beavers, you know, eating poplar and that kind of stuff. So I strongly recommend you check that out. But I'd love to get to some of these other questions.
Yeah, that's fine, but let me try to do both. I'll try to move through the photo as I'm answering questions, but let me just quickly, these are the most important sites. I just want to quickly say, this is in Montville, Maine. Look at the magnificent wetland just upstream that threatens nothing, you know, that would not be there if not for the beaver deceiver. So that's a recurring theme. So very exciting in that, but that's the great opportunity. So go ahead and hit me with a question and I'll, this is a regular beaver dam, okay? So just to give you a general idea, it's just a little simpler concept than a culvert site. Go ahead, hit me.
All right, some of these are sort of questions about beaver lifestyle, I guess. Someone asked, how can we identify the primary home of a beaver and a birthing home? She was told they had a separate den for nesting and birth. Is that,
Not really. Over the years and decades, there'll be an enormous amount of dynamism. They'll just go from one lodge to another. They'll make new lodges. Incredibly dynamic. So you know, it's ever changing. So you just have to. You can observe and tell what, you know. They'll all get together in the fall because they want to huddle and save energy that way. And you know, you can always tell a lodge where they're getting ready for winter will be more pointed and it'll be darker because it'll be wet. And there'll be likely be a cache supply you can see next to it. So, and then they have their young fairly early in the spring. So they'll almost always, I suspect, have their young in that lodge that they overwintered in. But I think some beavers quickly, they get tired. I can't imagine that, but you know, being inside that little mud hut all winter long with your family members and no HBO. You know, I think there is a lot of dispersal just to kind of get away from each other a little bit in the spring. So maybe the male will go to go stay in another lodge for a while. So, but incredibly dynamic. If you had a picture of a lodge through the decades, you know, it would just be constantly changing shape. And they senesce, you know, if they're not maintained, just like a beaver dam, they decay and senesce very quickly. So they'll drop down and then the beavers will overwinter there and they'll come back up and they'll change shapes and just amazing. Okay, just quickly, this is in Down East Maine. Again, look at the fantastic upstream wetland, big, huge, wonderful wetland that requires beavers to survive. And so that is the kind of site I love. And here's another one in New Hampshire. Same thing. Look at the upstream wetland. You can't have that if you can't protect that culvert. You see that this is at the Fort Dix. That's another shooting range. But you can see that the whirlpool breaks are getting much bigger. And this is, you can hit me with a question anytime. Tell me to shut up. I'm trying to do both.
If you destroy a beaver lodge, would it just result in the beaver dropping more trees to rebuild? Conversely, do beavers reuse old lodges? So it would help prevent them from dropping so many trees if you leave abandoned lodges in place.
Yeah, maybe. I don't really generally, and again, every wetland is going to be different. I don't generally associate tree felling with lodge building. You know, they're mostly felling trees to get food, you know, and I guess that sort of, as they process it, bring it into the wetland, debark it, you know, a lot of it might become part of a dam or lodge. But a lot of that stuff, particularly given the fact that these flowages were forested not long ago, there's a lot of materials in the water just already that, you know, in half, you know, who knows, I don't know what percentage, but half of it's just mud, let's say. And so they're just dredging all that old stuff, mostly from the water. but they'll add other stuff as well. But no, there's no reason to ever destroy a lodge. I mean, I hear horror stories a lot. People, if they can reach it with a backhoe, they destroy it when the beavers are inside, and maybe they've just had kits, or people will blow them up with dynamite. It's just awful, awful, crazy, stupid, brutal stuff that is totally unnecessary. Every one of those lodges is a wonderful microhabitat used by all kinds of animals. I mean, that might comprise 80-90% of the Canada goose nest. They're always on top of beaver lodges, and turtles bask in them, and insects live in them, and tons of birds. Actually, I got to get to those pictures. I'll show you another use of lodges. So just, and I've counted 8 lodges a couple of times, and a 5-acre wetland. So it's no reflection on the population. That's just beavers through time building new lodges. It's always only one family of beavers because of territorial behavior. This is just to point out that even in a very tight site, you can make it work. I can make it work at any site, but you have to be really creative and flexible. And this is a huge watershed. Those are 2 18-inch diameter pipes. And so that filter is actually not big enough, even though that's 16 feet by 5 feet. It's not big enough for the amount of water I'm pulling through there. And the beavers have started to bury that. So I'm going to have to address that. So yeah, I'm not overbuilding these things. Here's another tricky little thing. Caroline, anytime, here's a Penobscot Nation site where there's a 80-acre beaver flowage just upstream in that incredibly flat area of Alton. And so this beaver deceiver is not only protecting the road, but it's protecting the values in that remarkable ecosystem.
So somewhat, well, just while you're talking about the values of the ecosystem, can you just give a sort of quick overview of some of the values, the ecological and values to humans of those wetlands?
Yeah.
And flood control and
biodiversity, better hunting, better fishing, better trapping, vast amounts of game animals, vast amounts of beauty. I mean, gosh, I think wildlife is, in viewing wildlife is like an art thing for humans. It's an aesthetic thing. So the more life, the more concentration of life, the more song, the more color, the more movement, just absolute spiritual value, if you will, for humans. Tremendous, but tremendous biodiversity. Hydrologically, they're the greatest sediment sinks. So you're going to have cleaner water downstream. You're going to have less sedimented in spawning grounds. All of our native fish, all of our native animals evolved in a world where beavers were damming the heck out of 1 or 2 or 3% of the landscape. They were all in vast abundance when Europeans arrived. Anybody who fishes for brook trout knows it. Just a tremendous place to go fishing. So yeah, beaver dams not bad for fish. It's I know that's a hot topic these days, but no.
Someone asked if you have any pictures of beavers trying to build a dam around the fences.
No, but I could. Yeah. I'm sorry I don't have more of that type of stuff, because I really wanted to focus on the more general themes and of course, flow devices. And I'll say in my life, I don't really need to see beavers. It doesn't do that much for me, because what I enjoy is just seeing what they've done. They leave so much sign behind, and there's such a story with every flowage. And so I can go in them and just get tremendous pleasure, just about a lot of the things I've talked about, the beauty of dead trees, or the history that represents, and, what kind of predators are coming in to try to catch beavers, whatever it may be. Well,
so I have a related question.
There's another one, Caroline, flood control, because these do act as sponges. And particularly if you get a massive rain following a dry period, like beaver, again, I said they're on very small streams, most flowages. So if you get a drought, the water's going to drop below the dams. And then if that is followed by a hurricane that hits Maine, let's say in August or September, then there's going to be a tremendous amount of storage capacity behind all those dams if you have a lot of beavers and a lot of dams in a given watershed. And then they release the water slowly over time, reducing the peak flow periods that cause all the downstream damage. But even if they start out full, wetlands still have a capacity to absorb more water during very wet periods.
So a related question. So for land stewards that want to attract beavers and encourage them to build dams and create flowages in suitable habitat, what is your advice?
Get a little more active politically. I mean, we conservationists tend to be very passive people, and this, I often say, if I look at somebody's property and they say, well, I say, well, this is a tremendous habitat. You haven't had beavers here in 10 years. Well, the regional beaver population, therefore, is far lower than it should be. You're not getting dispersing beavers because they're all being killed. They're all being killed at culverts. And sometimes, I find them relatively easy to find and to kill or trap. And so, if you have even, sadly, this is our keystone species. It might be our most valuable keystone species. And yet, if you look at the regulations, they're wide open. They're begging people to kill as many beavers as they possibly can because so far we've been unable and reluctant to protect culverts. And so what we do is we have 6-month-long seasons for our keystone species, unlimited harvest. So if you do have a trapper who's skilled and active, they can, I've known some that, took 500 beavers a year up in there's a big Penobscot territory where the guy was active. There wasn't a single beaver. So
So when you say get politically active, then you mean basically lobby with your town selectmen to, these devices, lobby IF&W to.
Yeah, sure. Or to embrace high quality flow devices, and to start to checking off these conflict points instead of just doubling down on killing. And so you can easily do that in a town. You just have to get engaged and take on the issue, and then you have more beavers around. It's more likely you're going to have them on your property. Now, having said that, there are some forestry management things you can do to improve the habitat and make it more desirable. But if you have low gradient area on a small stream, you're going to get beavers if they're not being overkilled, or if there aren't very many of them, or if there's an adequate number of them in any given town.
And aren't there some devices? I don't know if you work with these, but I know my son has out west has been involved, where they sort of start to build a beaver dam to create faster moving water to attract. There's a name for them that escapes me.
Yeah, it's called the beaver dam analog, which I don't use. I've been doing it for decades, and I just call them starter dams. They don't have to look anything like a beaver dam. They just need to get the beavers started. And I got some pictures here if we can move along. One thing I want to say about the trapping and the killing of beavers. Until we had high quality flow devices and people who can make them, we had no choice, to kill beavers. You can't have clogged culverts. You can't have flooded out roads. And so that is critically important. And I'm sorry to say it's still important, but as we transition to high quality flow devices, which we have to do, we have to get that going. We're not doing it nearly aggressively enough. But in the meantime, the killing of beavers is keeping our roads drivable. But it's also making us much poorer because it's inefficient and it's very costly because it's not very effective. But it is effective at degrading ecosystems. So, guys, let's move on. Carolyn, you got the general concept here. I'm just going to, it's I don't know who that old guy is, but he looks very lost and confused. this is very difficult work. Okay, you may not need to be told that, but if you want to do it, it's very hard, and it has to be done well. Obviously, this is kind of fun. Okay, this is really fun. This is in Marlborough, Vermont. And you see, I put, the reason I decked these two little receiver fences is so the fire department can stand out there and put their hose in the water and use this as a fire pond. It's I love it whenever, and they do, they do at several sites. And this is a very great value for roadside beaver ponds, great potential value. So this is a flowage that was reoccupied by beavers very early in the recovery process, right? So they flooded it, and there was dead trees there, and they all fell over because it's been 50, 75 years since they first flooded it. So those trees have fallen over. So there was just open marsh here. No dead trees as perch trees, right? So as I'm working there, it's species after species is landing on that beaver lodge and using it as a crucial perch. Here's tree swallows. Oops, I don't know how that got in there. That's in Maine. Okay, I know the point. This is a site where I failed like 3 times. And that hump of dirt you see on the right of the square fence, that's an old round fence filter. That's how I started, but I didn't give up, they buried it. So now I keep making it more robust, and you can do it. You can win, and it's still good economics, even if you have to rebuild it a few times. Because you're going to end the problem for a long, long time once you get there. Red-winged blackbird and robin, right, on the same lodge. Isn't that cool? And here's a kingbird eating a dragonfly. I mean, just a miracle. This is one beaver in 1 month. Then the beaver left. One beaver, 1 month. And you have this wonderful microhabitat created for all sorts of animals, that including perching birds. It's the kind of phenomenal value you get. And then I came back the next spring, and there's a goose nest on it. So incredible. Beaver lodges have incredible value. And I don't know. This is just a little case study. This is a site in the same town of Marlborough. This is how it always starts like this, right? And this has been going on for probably 50 years. Anyway, this is an example of me doing a starter dam, not a analog, but a starter dam, combining that with a flow device. But the road is nice and high, and so I could build this. That's a starter dam, just to get the beavers, a little framework. And you see they're starting to dam on it, and I'm baiting them as well. You see the aspen in the water. I want to draw them down there and get them to build a nice starter dam here, or a nice beaver dam. Anyway, so it's that easy. It's that easy to get them to dam where you want to dam. And then it just kept getting bigger and bigger and richer. And that's the pipe system. But just full of, I went by there last fall, and there's, about 100 wood ducks in there. I've seen otters there. You don't need to hear all this species. It's teams with life. There's probably 4 or 5 beaver lodges that are all wonderful habitats. There's 3 in that picture. So, yes. So this is also a fire pond. Yes, Caroline.
Can you say something about, you mentioned that beavers are really territorial. How big is their territory? And you said there's a bunch of different lodges in that one wetland. How do they establish their territory?
Yeah, by fighting and hurting other beavers. But you can't really answer the territorial thing. They can be very big. It really depends on the topography and the nature of the wetlands, and they can be very big or very small. But
right, there's a couple more questions that I want to get to.
They defend large territories, and so you don't have to worry about a massive population of beavers ever.
Yeah.
Well, this is another diversion dam. You see, just upstream from this flow device, and so the beavers are starting to dam it. And all these diversion dams, the road's high enough so there's no threat to the roads, and yet you can create for almost no cost compared to a man-made wetland. Almost no cost. You can get the beavers to dam where you want them to, have a tremendous wetland, and it does divert their attention away from the flow device. So it makes the flow device even more robust. There's another one at the Penobscot Nation. Here's one in Vermont. It doesn't have to look anything like a beaver dam. Ideally, it'll be non-porous enough so you get a little bit of a disparity between the water heights, and then you get what I call spillover stimuli, the sound and particularly the sound of falling water, and that'll really stimulate damming behavior. That's what that site became very quickly from that to that. And there was tremendous erosion in this watershed because the beavers have been being killed for years, and all the dams are gone, and the banks are just getting eaten away as they frequently do out west. Okay,
Can
yeah, please, guys, hang in there.
The beavers living in the Cat Ants River seem to be bank beavers. Can you tell us how bank beavers are different from regular lodge builders? Are they larger? Is their winter behavior different? What happens when the river gets lower in the summer?
Yeah.
Along a tunnel, do they dig into a bank?
There's no difference at all. It's the same species in a different habitat, and beavers love to dig into banks. And so a lot of wetlands won't have a bank, so you don't get much of that. But if you have good banks with deep, fine soil, yeah, they're going to dig in them a lot.
Here's an interesting question from someone who has a lake house. There's no running water, but there's a beaver nest nearby, and it's cutting down trees. Can beavers be relocated? Any issues of beavers biting children?
Biting children. Oh, I suppose they'll bite a dog. More likely they'll bite a dog every now and then. They do bite people occasionally. It's very rare. Don't swim in the spring by a lodge that you think might have kits in it, because then the beavers get a little more aggressive. But it's the odds of it happening are, incredibly small. I've been in wetlands my whole life, and I've never been attacked by a beaver. I would never, never expect it to ever happen. They're scared to death of humans and predators for the most part. Every now and then, ever so rarely, a beaver will get rabies and do some weird stuff. But there is relocation of beavers sometimes. No, not really. And the thing, it's no different in terms of solving the problem or eliminating them from the source ecosystem. It's the exact same thing. You're going to sterilize it. If you remove all the beavers, it doesn't, from your ecosystem, it doesn't matter whether they're alive or dead. You don't have beavers there anymore. And you're going to have a problem. The next time a new beaver shows up, you're going to have the same problem. So your trees, if you don't protect your trees from chewing, you're going to have trees chewed. So it's just not a reliable remedy. And in most states, it's illegal on top of that. So yeah, no, don't do that. Just protect your trees. It's easy to protect trees with a cylinder of wire. I mean, I have a certain technique I use, but that is not, anybody can do that, but you just have to do it. You have to get ahead of the beavers. If you don't act, they're going to beat you to that tree. So you start with your favorite trees that are close to the water. Okay, they're the ones you want to protect first. You don't have to protect all the trees. Remember, beavers have to eat too. And frequently, especially along a lake shore where there's sunlight available, the trees will grow too closely together to ever grow a good tree. So a little thinning that the beavers will do for free could be a good thing. So you just protect the best trees and your favorite trees, start close to the water and work back. And then you're done. That'll be there. If you do a good job, it'll be there for 50 years, maybe 100 years. And it doesn't matter. Beavers can come or go. You're protected. This is just a very difficult little mucky site. And so it was hard to make the flow device work because I had, it was like 4 feet of just muck. I couldn't even move in there. And it was hard to build a flow device that was big enough. But you see, I put a pipe system off to the right here. You see the filter there. But crucially, I'm making a starter dam upstream to just get their focus off of this and in the process, create a wonderful wetland. Just shows you how, you have to work with the topography. So every site's different. And this is just a site up in Canada. Ontario, and this is what they do up there too. It's the same issue everywhere throughout Eurasia and North America. It's the exact same issue. Beaver behavior is the same, and the properties of water are the same. This is at Fort Dix again, but you can see the beaver chew in that tree. That indicates the water was at that level. That's when the culverts were clogged, the water was that high. Beavers don't climb up trees to do that. There's my son Forrest. And this is what you often see. This is what was being used as a so-called flow device in Vermont. Just it'll never do anything but keep the beavers, prevent the beavers from directly clogging the culvert. They can still build a big dam and completely block the culvert. But even if I'm sure they're killing the beavers too. So then you get a big flood, right? And you need all the capacity in those culverts, and you've reduced it with your gimmicks here, by 60, 75%. And so the road's going to wash out because you've blocked the culverts, even in absence of beavers. So this is what I did instead in that site. Excuse me. PVC situation. You see again a nice upstream beaver dam here. Just another Massachusetts site. This is in northern Maine. Everyone's different. This is kind of unique. This is on my own property. I'm encouraging the beavers to dam along the upstream side of the road, and I just made a series of little pipes underneath the road. So I want to, anyway, you can have the water level much higher on the upstream side than your road and still be fine if you do it right. And you can get fish through. I can get fish through any beaver dam with a flow device if it's really that important. And I know it is important, particularly sometimes for alewives. But the best way to do that and most permanent way is with a flow device, not by endlessly breaching dams or killing this native keystone species. So here's just a series of little fish ladders. And then I mentioned that the issue of digging. This is a beaver den underneath this road that's caved in. So beavers, when they dig into a bank, they dig just below the water line, and so it's a pretty narrow zone that and predictable digging zone. So you can just put fencing there to prevent them from digging in. Boy, look at that beautiful wetland. Owned by Carol Richards in Stonington, Maine. I mean, absolutely spectacular. This is right on the coast, right? And so you have a lot of bald eagles. The bald eagles are coming in there and landing and drinking fresh water, every day. So it has great value. Probably very important as a migratory stop, because it's close to the coast, but very isolated. Way down on a peninsula like that. Very, very vulnerable. The beavers are very vulnerable. So if you kill them here, it may be a much longer time before new beavers will arrive. This is a big field in Vermont that used to be, you see this little, if you look to the far left, you see a little tiny mound over there. That's a beaver lodge. That's the only, the beavers are, this is all ancient beaver habitat. This should be a magnificent wetland. But the beavers they've been allowed to have that little tiny corner over there, and that's it. And, this is just a mowed field. It's not, the hay's not used for anything. It's just because we're obsessed with mowing and not obsessed, as I hope we will become, with farming biodiversity, farming beauty, farming wetland values. Boy, that's a pretty site in Marlborough, New Hampshire. Look at that. You see the cache to the right? And so you just see, you see all sorts of themes, two lodges together. It doesn't really mean anything. Next year, it could be one lodge. It could turn into a triple header, let's say. So just really, really cool. And that's my business. I'd be glad to help you or your towns. There aren't many people who have been as obsessive as I have been about this issue. So there's very few people that can really do it effectively. But I'm in Maine working every year and would be glad to help. And I'm happy to train anybody. And give as many presentations as possible. It's a great opportunity to save money and to create some wonderful ecological values in particular. So thank you all for bearing with me. And I'd love more questions.
One more question.
Super.
Someone wants to know where you go, where you work in the US.
Anywhere I can turn a modest profit. I've consulted on the ground in, over half the states probably, and probably consulted in, 95% of them, and in the provinces as well. And I've been to Europe about 6 times. So that's the beauty of it. Like I said, it's the same issue everywhere.
Well, I think that one of the takeaways is that we can all play a role in doing some educating within our communities, of our selectmen, of our road crews, about, that this is an option rather than the annual cleaning out of the culverts, that, there's a way to control the level of the water at an appropriate level, but keep the wetland and keep the beavers. So
Absolutely.
I think
Yeah.
that's a big takeaway.
I hope people do it.
So I will, someone asked what organization will help us make the biggest impact in Maine. I'm not aware of anyone, I think part of it is talking to IF&W and letting them know that, that we value the habitat that beavers create, and that we'd like to see solutions that are beyond, trapping an unlimited number of them. And so
I mean, I don't know if these state wildlife agencies realize how lucky they are. I mean, they're in a position to be incredibly influential in a very positive way. Incredibly. I mean, so frequently people, they have a problem with wildlife. Their first instinct is to call the state. It's not to call me, so they have a great opportunity.
Well, I think a lot of it is that people aren't aware that, you're out there doing this, and probably a couple of others, but I will put a link to, when I send out a link to the recording, I'll put a link to Skip's website. It's already in the chat, but and I would really encourage people to check out Skip's website. It's really great. There's a beautiful video in it, and you can see some videos of beavers and in the
you want to see beavers.
All right, I think that covers it. We've gone a little bit over, and I want to give Skip a chance to get some rest so that he can go continue his work in Florida tomorrow.
Thank you. I just want to mention one thing, because you brought it up. The video that was taken by a drone at my house, it doesn't show all the wetlands that are there, but when my parents bought that property in 1965, the beavers had not yet returned from the fur trade. And then when they did, there was a town road culvert there. So the town was killing them for a while. And so all the wetlands you see there, and the millions upon millions of life forms that have been produced in that area over the decades are the product of the original beaver deceiver, of one flow device on one culvert. And the town hasn't spent a dime on that culvert in over half a century now that our family has been protecting it. So that may be the example of the economic and ecological value of a good flow device. And
there's a nice Skip has a nice case study on his website that sort of documents the annual cost of cleaning out culverts versus the one-time cost of installing one of these devices. So there's some great information there that I think is useful. So great. Well, thank you, Skip. And thanks everybody for joining us. And I'll send some more resources related to beavers around later this week. Thank you, Skip.
Thank you, Caroline. Thanks, everybody.
Take care. Bye.
Yep. Bye.